الآن يمكنكم المشاركة في مبادرة الأيام الرقمية تحت شعار انطلق بقوة مع جوجل، والتي يتناول فيها خبراء جوجل عناوين جديدة أسبوعيا مثل السحابيات، مهارات من جوجل، أندرويد، فلتر، ذكاء الآلة، فايربيس، ديزاين ثينكينج، مقسمة إلى دورات وورشات عمل يومية بالإضافة إلى مسابقات أسبوعية. شاهد الأيام الرقمية مباشرة على اليوتيوب وشارك رأيك وأسئلتك مع خبراء جوجل، واحصل على شهادة حضور في كل محاضرة تشترك فيها. هذا وأكثر من الأحد إلى الخميس ابتداء من الساعة 9 بتوقيت دبي عبر الرابط المبين youtube.com/gdgmina.
Hello everyone, my name is Samia Ashraf. I am a Flutter developer working for an IT startup here in Dubai called BB Array. And I am working with Flutter for past 2 years now. I love learning about new concepts in Flutter and teaching them to people as well. So my topic for today is a very interesting one. It's called FlutterFire UI, which is used to simplify social logins in Flutter. So let us begin by discussing today's agenda. So today we will start with a quick introduction to Firebase, where I will be talking about what Firebase is and why do we need it in FlutterFire UI. Next, we will explore the Firebase installation steps. And this is one of the crucial steps to carry out FlutterFire UI. Next, we will look at what FlutterFire UI is, the main topic for today, and how it can help us with social logins and why was it introduced. Next, we will explore the UI part of FlutterFire UI, the different UI that has been contributed, and how it can again help us with the social logins. Next, we will move on to the email authentication and look at the detailed working of how email authentication can be carried out in FlutterFire UI. Finally, we will go to the Google social login and how the FlutterFire's UI supports Google social login and how it is different from our traditional approach. So let us begin with a quick introduction to Firebase. Now, if you are a programmer at some point in your programming journey, you must have heard of Firebase. So Firebase is a platform that helps you build and grow apps. Now, what does it mean? So you can still build a production ready app with or without Firebase. So Firebase is not a mandatory requirement in a Flutter application. But some of the reasons why you should be including Firebase is because it is like an app development platform that can help you build a better app and also grow your simple app into a bigger audience app. And you can continuously keep improving your app with Firebase. So Firebase functionalities can be divided into 3 sections. The left side, you see the developed features, starting with real-time database, authentication, cloud messaging, and so on. So real-time database is when you want your Flutter application to have a database, but you don't want to use bigger databases like MySQL and others. So you can use something called as a real-time database, which is offered from Firebase. The next is the authentication part, the one that we will be exploring in detail today. The other section is the grow section, which you see on the right-hand side, which includes push notifications, app indexing, dynamic links, invites, and also AdWords. Now, this grow section is used in the app to help your audience to grow the audience of an application. So the dynamic links and invites are one of the key features where a user of an application can share the application with a non-user and then invite them to download the application. So those are the grow features. And lastly, we have the earn feature, which includes the add mob. So like for example, if you want your app to make money for you, you can use this earn feature of Firebase. So that was about Firebase, a simple introduction. And the reason why you should be using Firebase is if you want to build better apps using the build features, using the develop features, and the app quality can also be improved. And also, if you want to grow your business using the grow features, you should be using Firebase in your application. Now, like I said earlier, we will be exploring in detail about the authentication part of Firebase. Now, the types of authentication that is supported by Firebase includes Google authentication, Facebook login, Twitter login, and GitHub login. So these are the 4 social login authentications. And then we have email login as well as phone authentication. So, like for example, if the user does not have a social media account, they can use the email authentication part. They can register into the application and then their details will be stored in the Firebase database. And later, when they come back to the app, they can log in using the same credentials and they can start using the app. That is about email authentication. The similar is for phone authentication, but instead of email, you will be using your phone for authenticating. So now let us explore the Firebase installation steps. And like I said previously, this is one of the crucial steps. And in order to in order to have the FlutterFire UI in your application, you have to get these steps correct, and the flow must be maintained. And it's actually very easy to go wrong here. It's very easy to mess this step. So let's explore in detail. So the first step is to install the Firebase CLI. I often get asked this question: what is Firebase CLI and how is it different from Firebase? So Firebase CLI, or Firebase command line interface, is like a medium that is used to communicate between your app and the Firebase. Your Flutter application cannot directly communicate with the Firebase. Using the Firebase CLI, we create a medium of communication. So it's very important to install the Firebase CLI, otherwise, the Firebase commands will not work. So using the curl command, we can install the Firebase CLI. Once that is done, the next step is to install the FlutterFire UI plugin. So this is the plugin using which we can carry out the FlutterFire UI using social logins. And next, once we have installed the Firebase CLI, we will activate the FlutterFire CLI using the dart pub global activate FlutterFire _ CLI command. So once all of these steps are done, that is installing Firebase CLI, installing the FlutterFire UI plugin, and also activating the FlutterFire CLI, we can go on to the next step, which is the configuring the project. So next step is to select your Firebase project. Now you can either select an existing project or create a new Firebase project. And the command that we use is flutter configure. So in my case, I have created a new Firebase project. You will be prompted to enter the name for the Firebase project and also to select the platforms where you want the configuration to appear. In my case, I have selected Android, iOS, and web. Now, because I have selected iOS, I will be prompted to enter the iOS bundle ID. Now this can be your any iOS bundle ID, anything that you prefer. So once we have created the Firebase project, you can head over to your Firebase dashboard and you will see this Flutter, your project being created in the dashboard. Check for the configurations. This should be exactly the ones that you've selected previously. And if you don't see the project in the Firebase dashboard, that means you must have missed some of the steps. And in such situations, if you have missed any step, it is always better to delete the project and start over. So yeah, with this, we complete the Firebase installation steps. So now that the project is created, we can start looking at what is FlutterFire UI before we actually start using FlutterFire UI. So a quick definition before we go to the definition of FlutterFire UI, let us look at what social login is. Because in order to understand FlutterFire UI, you have to know what is social login and why it is used with social login. So social login or social authentication in simple words is your app allowing a user to log in using a social account. Now, this social account can be any social media account. It could be Google account, Twitter account, Facebook account, or even an Apple account. And you must have seen these buttons at some point in the login screens. So this is nothing but the social login buttons. And on the right hand side, I have a GIF here, GIF video where I've demonstrated how a user is performing the social login. So when the user clicks on the sign in with Google button, they will be prompted to select the Google account, the Gmail account. And if you have an existing Gmail account, you will be authenticated and you will be taken inside the application. So this is a simple demonstration of how social login is carried out using the Google socials. The So you must be wondering, FlutterFire UI just came into existence, and we did use social logins before. So what is the difference and why was it created? Now, before FlutterFire UI existed, if I wanted to configure social login in my application, I have to write the code for login screen, the code for register screen, forgot password, and as well as reset password screens. And if I had to include social login, I had to create those buttons, write the code for those button widgets, and also the Google icon and all of that. Now, before FlutterFire UI, I had to do all of these screens from scratch manually. Now, this is completely fine if I'm just working on one project. But if a developer is working on multiple projects with social logins, then it becomes the same step that is carried out repeatedly. So that is the reason FlutterFire team understood this and they came up with the FlutterFire UI package where they built the plugin offered ready-made widgets, a set of Flutter widgets, and utilities that could be used by the developer to build the UI for their application. So for example, I have here three widgets: sign in screen, register screen, and sign out screen. These are the Flutter widgets, which also include some utilities. And using these widgets, I can actually build the user interface with the Firebase and which can be used for the social login. So the ones that we saw previously are the UI widgets. Next, we will look at the provider configuration widgets. Like I said previously, FlutterFire UI supports social logins as well as email and phone authentications. So email provider configuration is used when I want to carry out email authentication. And similarly, phone provider configuration when I want to carry out phone authentication. And then we have the social media configurations for Google, Facebook, Twitter, and Apple. And one thing to note about FlutterFire UI is that it is still in beta. And yeah, so it is still under development. So next, let's look at the UI part of FlutterFire UI. Now, when I said previously that FlutterFire UI offers the design widgets like sign in screen, register screen, and also the sign out button, this is what I meant. The image that you see here is actually the widgets itself. If I use the sign in screen widget with the email provider configuration, this is what I will see: a sign in screen with the email and password field and also a sign in button. I did not draw any of this. I did not code for any of this. This was provided by the FlutterFire UI package itself. So FlutterFire UI package comes with ready screens for sign in, register, and as well as forgot password. And the reason why you should be using this is because tons of time was saved for designing of the screens by writing multiple widgets and also handling navigation. So FlutterFire UI will not only provide the screens for sign in and register. In fact, it will also offer the navigation. Now, from my sign in screen, if I happen to click register, it will take me directly to the register screen without me actually having to write for the widgets and also the navigation part. So next, let us look at the email authentication. So this can be considered as one of the simplest forms of authentication in FlutterFire UI. And the only configuration that you have to do is in the Firebase, you have to enable the email provider and save it. That's the only configuration is there for this. And later in the code, what I will do is, in order to use the email authentication, I will use the sign in screen widget, which we saw previously, along with the email provider configuration. So that is the type of authentication that I'm using. And here, like I said previously, I don't need to have a social media account. If I am already a user, I can directly sign in. But if my data, if I haven't registered before, it will tell me that the account does not exist. In such case, I will register my email with the password and then I will be authenticated into the application. So when I do this, my data will actually be stored with the Firebase. So that is how it will authenticate me. And if I'm not a user, I will be using the register screen widget along with the email provider configuration. And once I'm registered into the application, my data will be in the users tab of the Firebase project. And one of the key features of using this kind of authentication is that the admin here will have total control over the database. And if I want to reset a user's password or disable an account, delete an account, I will have total control over that because the database will be saved in the Firebase itself. So this kind of authentication method, the admin will have control over the database. And as for the sign out, the other widget offered by FlutterFire UI is the sign out button. Notice that once I am authenticated into the application, When I click on the sign out button, it will remove the authentication. It will actually perform the sign out operation and it will take me back to the sign in screen. Now, in the coding part, the only thing that I have done is just write the sign out button widget. I haven't done any design part and I haven't handled any navigation as well. So once I'm authenticated, I will be having the user, my data will be stored in the snapshot.data. I have used a stream builder that listens to the user streams, and my data here will be stored in snapshot.data. So if after the authentication, if I want to pass on the user data to any widget, I will be just using snapshot.data and the next screen will have access to my data. So this is the home screen where I will be actually using the snapshot data. That is, if you see here, user.email. So it will display the email there. And then I have a text widget for which says this is home screen. And after that, I have a sign out button, just a simple sign out button. And the UI is already done. So this is how the email password authentication is carried out using the FlutterFire UI. Notice that without FlutterFire UI, I had to actually write the widgets, I had to handle the navigation, and also mainly the logic part. So it saved me lots of time by using the FlutterFire UI. Next, let's go for the Google Social Login. So the social login here will require some additional extra authentication steps. Now, in order to use Google Social Login in the application, along with the FlutterFire UI plugin, I also have to use the Google Sign-in plugin. Only using Google Sign-in plugin, I can actually carry out Google Social Login. And one of the steps that I need to do in Firebase dashboard is to enable the Google provider. Once I'm done with that, the extra configurations include, it will be different for iOS and Android. For the iOS, in the plugin, in the pub.div itself, it will tell the extra additional steps like downloading the Google service info.plist file and then to copy the client ID as well as the reversed client ID. So these are some of the configurations that has to be mandatorily done, because if that is not done, then you will not be able to use the Google Social Login. As for Android, the additional step is to add the SHA keys in Firebase. So the client ID in iOS, we will add it when we are using the Google provider configuration. And in the info.plist file, we will add the reversed client ID. For the Android, we will use this command to get the project's SHA keys. Once you get the SHA keys, you will add it in the Firebase. So the way we use Google Social Login is, again, we have a sign-in screen and we have the email provider configuration in case the user wants to log in using the email authentication method. And when I include Google provider configuration along with the client ID, it will draw the button which is used to log in using Google. So when I click on that button, I will be prompted to select my Gmail account. And once I do that, I will be authenticated and I can enter the app and actually start using it. So when I'm authenticated, I will be taken to the starting point of the application when the user is authenticated. And same goes for the sign out button. I can also use a sign out button here, and the Google social login will be the authentication will be removed and I will go back to the login screen. So the sign out button is the same for both email provider configuration and Google provider configuration. Earlier, we saw the email provider configuration snapshot.data. The same goes for the Google provider configuration as well. There is no additional steps to access the user's data. With just the same code, which says snapshot.data, you will have access to the user's data. And similarly, you can use it saying user.email. So the detailed explanation about FlutterFire UI is, I've actually written an article on it, which we will be sharing the link soon in the chat box. So you can explore this article and it will have step-by-step procedure of how you can install the Firebase, how you can carry out email authentication, as well as Google social login. So here what I've explained is actually just a basic idea. So the Medium article will have a detailed idea, and if you want to explore more on it, you can definitely explore the Medium article to understand better. And thank you for being a part of this conference. So one of the comments reads, did you use Google APIs for the authentication access form to secure input data fields? Actually, I did not. I just used the FlutterFire UI uh, widgets, and I did not have to put in any logic. So the logic was already done from the plugin itself. So that's the thing about FlutterFire UI. You don't have to write separate logic. So all of it will be done from the plugin side itself. Yeah, if any of you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. Thank you for joining today's session. I hope you got a little insight on what FlutterFire UI is, and do explore more on it, because I think it's a very good package that really eases social login. So if you're someone who constantly develops apps with social logins, this plugin will be really helpful, as it saves a lot of time and also effort. You don't have to put in your own logic. The logic will already be provided by the plugin itself. So do explore more on it, and you can also refer to my Medium article for more information. Thank you, everyone.